Welcome to Libeth. He arrived in Japan in 1866, 3 years before the samurai world ended. He was one of the last Westerners to see it alive. That is the first thing to understand about Algernon Bertram Mitford, and about the book he would eventually publish in 1871 under the title Tales of Old Japan. Not that he was a scholar, not that he was a traveler in the ordinary sense, but that he arrived at a specific hinge moment in history and happened to be paying attention. He was a British diplomat attached to the legation in Japan, which means his access to the country was real but structured. He moved through Japanese political life not as an observer from the outside, but as an actor within a crisis that had not yet resolved itself. The shogunate was collapsing. The emperor was being restored to nominal power. Armed factions were moving through the countryside. And Mitford was there, writing dispatches, learning Japanese, collecting stories, watching a civilization reorganize itself under pressure it had never experienced before. The book he produced from those 4 years is not what it appears to be on the surface. It presents itself as a collection: tales, legends, essays on Japanese customs, a witnessed account of ritual execution, and in one sense that is exactly what it is. But underneath, the surface of the collection runs a much more urgent and much more complicated project. Mitford was not simply gathering curiosities for a British audience that had never encountered Japan. He was translating a world that was actively disappearing, fixing in print what the Meiji government was in the process of dismantling, and doing so through the particular lens of a Victorian Englishman who brought his own culture's preoccupations to everything he saw. The result is a text that tells you about Japan, and tells you about Victorian England, and tells you about what happens when one civilization tries to make legible another civilization that is simultaneously too foreign and too familiar to be seen clearly. The familiarity is part of what made the book so powerful and so dangerous. What Mitford found in the samurai world, the codes of loyalty, the rituals of honor, the willingness to die for an obligation, was not incomprehensible to his British audience. It was recognizable. It looked like what English culture imagined its own chivalric tradition had once been, before commerce and industrialization and the relentless rationalism of the 19th century had worn it away. When Mitford described the 47 Ronin, the retainers who spent years in patient, disciplined preparation before executing their lord's vengeance and then surrendering themselves to death, his British readers did not experience this as alien. They experienced it as a mirror. And that mirroring effect, that sense of Japan as the place where what England had lost could still be found, was one of the most consequential misreadings in the history of cross-cultural encounter. It shaped the Western image of Japan for a generation. The cliches that still circulate, the noble samurai, the ritual death, the honor that supersedes law, the loyalty that survives the death of the Lord, these images did not emerge from nowhere. They were constructed, selected, framed, and transmitted. And Tales of Old Japan is one of the primary places where that construction happened. Which means that reading the book carefully is not just an act of literary appreciation. It is an act of archaeology. You are digging through a text that contains a real civilization, a real set of historical pressures, a real moment of transformation, and also a set of Victorian projections, diplomatic assumptions, and selective emphases that shaped what that civilization looked like to the outside world for decades. This series is going to read the book as a system, not as a collection of entertaining stories, though it is that. Not as a historical document, though it is that too. But as a mechanism, a machine that takes the raw material of late Tokugawa Japan and transforms it into something legible, something consumable, something that fits the emotional and intellectual categories of Victorian England. We are going to look at the social and political world Mitford was observing, at how the book is constructed, and what choices went into that construction, at the characters and what they represent, at the literal and figurative layers of the text, at the violence and ritual that run through every page, and at the ethics of what Mitford was doing. A man from an imperial power documenting a culture being reshaped in part by imperial pressure, including his own country's. Every Western cliché about the exotic East, about the samurai, about the Japanese relationship to death and honor, this book is one of the places those clichés were born. Understanding where they came from, how they were made, and what they cost is not a minor exercise in cultural criticism. It is essential to understanding how the West still sees Japan today, and how Japan has had to live inside an image that was never entirely its own. That's all for today on Libeth. One new book every week. At least we try.